I'm really looking forward to hearing about Dylan's trip to Russia, so go ahead.
Okay. So, hi, thanks for coming out on this cold night. When we went to Moscow, we thought, we were told that it's going to be freezing. And, we should prepare for it. It was warmer than it was in Albany. And watching the weather there as opposed to this cold spell here, like in the films yesterday in Moscow. So we want to go back.
So it's a myth that it's just like so cold in Moscow that you can't go out. So it's a myth. I mean, it's kind of like here.
Anyway, so we have some pictures and some slides that we took. And we're just going to go through them and just talk. And I'm going to talk first, and then Mo's going to talk. And then we'll just open it up for questions. And maybe a lot of the stuff will come out more in the questions.
Do we need a mic, do you think?
I'm trying to see how to turn this one on. I haven't quite figured it out. So, do you know if this works?
Oh, yeah.
Put it on mine. Do we have to do something there? I didn't see any light. All right. She's going to go ask the guy. I'll try to speak loud while he does that. So anyway, I just wanted to start out with a little bit of my thought on politics of Russia and the Soviet Union, just for a minute or two. The reason I'm doing this is because we got some criticism within the peace movement for going to Russia at this particular time. And people are saying,
Has to get turned down now.
maybe if I just put it down here, was that?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. You know, I'm saying, are you pro-Putin and all this kind of stuff? My thoughts are these. First of all, for people that know me, I consider myself a socialist. Never the kind that was supportive of what was in the Soviet Union. However, I did believe that the Soviet Union was a post-capitalist country. That is, they had overthrown capitalism, did not have the large capitalist class that owns everything, but they had a political bureaucracy which was undemocratic, and there was not democracy in the Soviet Union. What really needed to happen was not only do you need to have socialized control of the means of production, but you also need to have people control the government and to ensure that those resources are distributed equitably throughout the society. And they weren't. The bureaucracy did much better than the others and so forth, and there was not democracy to maintain that level of inequality that existed, and that created some problems that eventually led to the overthrow. There were some great achievements that the Soviet Union did, getting the first spacecraft up in space, eliminating illiteracy in the country, and socialized medicine, socialized education through college, and so forth. But when it was overthrown, when it collapsed, imploded might be the better word, they went through a decade of very terrible economic times with a lot of poverty and a lot of unrest. And a lot of people that we spoke to actually gave Putin a lot of credit for bringing them out of that period and bringing stability back to Russia and a better economic life, better life for most people. And that was clear just by being there. Just walking around, Mo's going to talk more about what we did in Moscow and where we went to and so forth. I'm going to talk more about the conference that we went to. But just walking around, you can see people are well-dressed, are fed, well-fed, they look fine. you know, seem happy, seem taken care of. And we learned a lot about what goes on there that we never knew. For instance, a lot of the social programs did not disappear. So there still is free education in Russia through college, and they give you a stipend for going, so you have living expenses. There still is free medical care for all Russians, and you know, these were things that they will not give up easily. And still about 27% of the industry is nationalized, including their largest energy company. And energy is the major part of their economy. But what happened under when they left, when they put their economy in the hands of the free market, it was the places that were profitable that all the investment went into. And that tended to be the energy industry, to some extent steel, but a lot of the other industry were therefore underfunded and more or less collapsed. So they have a very big imbalance in their economy now. Don't produce a lot of the goods that they used to produce, or produce far fewer of them. In Putin's press conference, which we'll talk about a little bit, he said it became very clear to them in recent times, because of what's going on and the conflict they're having with the West, that they cannot just be a partner with everybody else in a capitalist market, and they have to figure out how to re-diversify in their economy. And they're actually making a plan to do that, which means they're going to have to make investment in these places which might not be very profitable, but they're making a decision as a society that they might have to do that. I'm not a Putin fan. Putin is a capitalist. He's one of the richest people in the Soviet Union, and so forth. That being said, he has been vilified here like every other leader of every other country that the United States doesn't like. They vilify these people, and in a very, very unfair way. He is extremely popular in Russia. They say his popularity might be as high as 85%, and that also is clear. There's not like there was in China or something where they might have had big official posters of people, you know, Mao or Stalin or whoever. You don't see that. But you see people with their cell phones. Everybody has an iPhone, by the way. See people with their cell phones with a picture of Putin on it, or people wearing a T-shirt with Putin on it, or something like this. And anybody you ask, pretty much they say that Putin has helped bring the economy back, that Putin has helped make them feel good about themselves again, stronger country. They really were happy with the Olympics, although that was really denigrated here. You know, they said it was such an important thing for us to do, and it's clear that he has a lot of support. So we were invited, UNAC was invited to go to a conference by a group called the Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia.
And this is their banner.
We knew very little about them. I looked at their website. Of course, it's in Russian, and tried to do some Google Translate and so forth. But they had a substantial website, and they had sections in English, and sections in Arabic, and sections in Chinese, and sections in different countries. And they had two websites. One was called Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia, and the other was called StopImperialism.com. And I'm anti-imperialist, so I thought that was a good one. And I noticed on there were a lot of things taken from the UNAC website. So I thought that's interesting. So when they invited us to come, me and two other people from UNAC got on the phone with them and had an hour conversation between the United States and Russia. We asked them who they are they part of the government? They consider themselves a non-governmental organization, not part of the government. Do you ever oppose what your government does? They say, yes, we do oppose what our government has done. They gave us examples. It's typically internal, not international, where they had some kinds of opposition. What are your activities? They said they hold a monthly rally at the U.S. Embassy on the 5th of each month. The 5th of each month, up until recently, was a time when all around the world, people were holding rallies in support of the Cuban Five, who have been in jail for many years in the United States. Great news have been recently released, so they don't have to do those on the 5th anymore. But they also brought in other issues into these things. And they told us a lot about what they were about. And they also were able to give us a little money to go. They said they could pay for 2 plane flights, and they'll pay for as many people as we bring for hotel rooms for 3 days. So 5 of us went. We split between the 5 of us the cost above what they gave us. Mo and I and one other person stayed an extra 3 days or so, and paid for ourselves to do that. And we went. The 5 who went from UNAC were myself and Mo, Joe Eisbacher. Joe is from Chicago. He's a member of something called the Antiwar Committee in Chicago. But you might have known him from the Stop FBI and also the Rasmia ODA defense. Now, what are those? Stop FBI is Stop FBI harassment. He is one of 23 anti-war activists, all members of UNAC, who had their homes raided a couple of years ago by the FBI and were given summonses to appear in front of a grand jury, which they all did. But when they got there, they said they will refuse to talk to the grand jury. And so they told them all to go home. They would put them in jail. And told them they will call them back for the grand jury. And they intend to continue this prosecution. They haven't been called back. All the material that was taken from their homes have been returned. They have told that they will be called back, however. And the reason they wouldn't talk to them is because it was clear what they wanted. These were people mostly who had visited Palestine. And they wanted the names of people that they met. And they said, well, we can't give you that. Those people might be killed. So we refused to do that. And so they said, okay, go home. But we feel it was a test case to see if they could prosecute people for their anti-war beliefs. That's what it was. So Joe came, and he's also involved in the Rasmia Oda case. Rasmia Oda is a Palestinian woman from Chicago who's lived here for 40 years. She's in her upper 60s. And she was arrested in Palestine many, many years ago, was released in a prisoner exchange, and left the country and came here, has been living here, and working as a community activist in a pro-Palestinian organization in Chicago for a number of years. And recently they arrested her and said she lied on her papers to get into the country because she didn't say she was arrested. And you know, she tried to explain to the court, well, I was arrested and they got a confession to me from me because I was convicted, but that confession was tortured out of me, and it was not a real confession. I just said what they wanted me to say, and so I don't consider that a valid arrest because a lot of Palestinians go through similar situations. I'm talking too much about that, but so I'm going to stop. Questions. The other person was Margaret Kimberly. Joe is also on the UNAC Administrative Committee. Margaret Kimberly is in the UNAC Administrative Committee. She's also a lead columnist for Black Agenda Report. And she went, and another guy from the International Action Center, Bill Doors from New York City, went. So the 5 of us were the American delegation that went there. There were people from other countries. There were a lot of people from Eastern Ukraine, including some major leaders of the people in the Eastern Ukraine, parts of the Eastern Ukraine, not all of it, have declared their own country. They've declared something called Nouveau Russia. It's the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. And so the Speaker of their parliament was at this conference, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Donetsk People's Republic was at this conference, and a bunch of other people organizing aid for them. We actually met one guy who was a fighter, and Mo has a picture of herself with him. We had dinner with him. He said he was Muslim. He didn't have a beard, and he drank like hell. so it wasn't a good whistle.
Everything you've heard about Russia and vodka is true.
So, anyway, we can talk a little bit more about that. There were people from Italy, the young kids, young people from the movement in Italy were there. There were people from from Yugoslavia, from Serbia. There was a man from Israel, who was an anti-Zionist Israeli, who was a writer and fairly well known, apparently, who said some important things. He basically said, this is a very interesting conference. And he said, the reason it's interesting is because, in my opinion, since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has stayed aloof from international politics. But now they are really under the gun. There's sanctions that were against Russia. Oil prices are being kept very, very low as an attack on Russia, an attack on the ruble and their economy. Russia is surrounded by military bases. They're being accused of sending troops into the Ukraine, which that was answered, interestingly, by Putin in the press conference, when he was questioned in a very harsh way by a BBC reporter. Why are you attacking eastern Ukraine? Everybody fears the Russia around the world because you're so aggressive. And here we are, peaceful people in Europe, and we're afraid now because of what you're doing and stuff like that. Beautiful answer, I'll tell you about it in a minute. So they were there. When I got there, I learned that I was actually the keynote speaker, which I didn't know. But I was the first speaker after they introduced people. And if you go to the UNAC website, which is unacpeace.org, you'll see a report and a few pictures, and you will also see all of the statements, all of the speeches that the five of us gave there. You can read them. They were all very strong anti-war speeches. This is what we do. But Margaret Kimberly has been very much involved in the struggle coming out of Ferguson, spoke about Ferguson, and she connected it as part of the war at home in the United States with the wars abroad. Did a great job of this. And they were very, very interested in this topic. All of us were interviewed. Let me see how I go on from here. That's me talking at the conference. And giving that address. And the person next to me was doing a simultaneous translation. And we were actually sitting kind of in the front to the left of this thing here, the five of us. And as they were speaking, which was mostly in Russian, they would do a simultaneous translation. Did a wonderful job of that. We were able to get the whole content of everything that people had said. This is the man that's the minister, foreign minister from the Donetsk People's Republic, speaking about what's going on there. And basically what is going on there that you don't see in the American press, besides there's a real war, a serious war, lots and lots of refugees, lots and lots of deaths. There is horrific bombing. You're not going to see them better because I'm sorry, these pictures aren't the greatest because I'll tell you why later. But anyway, I have better versions of these pictures, but you couldn't get them up here. But anyway, there's been lots of bombing of the cities in the eastern part of the Ukraine, and lots of shelling of homes, lots of killing. People are just, all of a sudden they'd be bombing a park, a house, a building is attacked and goes down. And so there's a lot of aid being organized and so forth. And he talked about all right.
So these pictures here, if any of you went to the Ukraine, we had a photo demonstration through BNP back in the summer. And it was photos that had been taken of what had happened in Odessa on May 2nd, which was a massacre.
And other places.
Well, yes, there are massacres in many places, but May 2nd was a real turning point in Odessa, the east of Ukraine. And at the conference, there were people coming from Ukraine who had personally taken pictures of the Odessa massacre, and they were, if you imagine outside this room where, let's say, the conference was being held here, so there were drapes and they had pictures all over the place. And these were, you know, like live pictures that somebody had taken of this massacre. So some of these pictures are here if you want to look at it after our talk. These were some of the pictures that were displayed. And, you know, the Western media, I don't know if they've covered it at all. But if you look at the alternative media, if you look on Facebook, there's some very good sites covering what's going on in Ukraine. And this is something that is extremely well known. So that was one of the real like the experience we had of what people really know about what's going on in Ukraine, in Russia, and certainly in Ukraine, in comparison with what we're being told in the West. It's like two different movies, completely different movies. So don't believe anything you hear in any of the mainstream media about Ukraine. Don't believe anything, because it's not true.
These days, I don't believe anything I hear in the media,
Period,
no
yeah.
matter what the subject is. These are some of the people who were there. We're carrying two signs. One is that flag that you see here, which is of the Russian anti-globalization movement. The guy in the middle is the head of this movement. His name is Alexander. He is very tall. He's also a basketball player. And he also celebrated his 25th anniversary, 25th birthday while we were there. Now, this is very young people who run this organization. The oldest that we saw was just turned 30 last week. It was Slavas, this guy that did a lot of interpreting for us. And most of these people don't know the Soviet Union. They never lived. There were one or two when the Soviet Union was destroyed. And they are really trying to figure out their own politics. A lot of it is separate from what most of us who have grown old in this world or grown older in this world think in terms of socialism, capitalism, or anarchism, or whatever. You know, they define the world today as a unipolar world, is the way they say it. Meaning, at one point they said there were two powers in the world, the Soviet Union and the United States. Today there's only one. And that's causing tremendous destruction. And they don't think there should be two. They think there should be it should be a multipolar world, and everybody should have the right to self-determination. And this is the basis by which they're trying to form their politics and trying to think through what to do. But it is very clear from this conference that that Israeli guy is right. This group and other groups are looking around outside their borders. Who might think like them? Who might they learn from? Who might learn from them? Who they could see as allies? And they look to us, and we're extremely excited about us being there. This other thing you can't read well, but this was a picture, this was a sign for Rasmia Oda, because Joe Eisenbecker, the guy all the way on the left, wanted to bring back a picture for their website or something, but this is not a very good. This woman here is the head of the Russian Green Party. She's also a member of the anti-globalization movement. After the conference, we had a press conference. It looks like all men, but it's not. Just the picture is all men. To my right, of course, sitting there is Mo, and to her right is Margaret Kimberly. So there were a few women on this panel, but it is a male-dominated organization. And we did find there's not the understanding in Russia of the gay issue or the women's issue as we have had here. When we first got there, it would have been 3 o'clock in the morning, Albany time. And we hadn't slept in almost 2 days with the airplane stuff. Right away, they wanted us to do a TV interview. So that's Joe Eisenbacher and me doing a TV interview, trying to stay awake. The guy on the left is our interviewer. And this is both TV and radio. It's kind of like what Democracy Now! Does. But it's heard all over the country. It's heard in Crimea. It's heard all over the country. They did this interview with us. And the woman in the middle is another UNAC person who just kind of came on her own. We didn't really know she was going to be there. She's from the committee in Chicago, and she knew Joe. But she's from Moldavia, and she's Russian. And Moldavia has a similar situation like the Ukraine. One part of it is very much, I think, Romanian, and the other part is Russian. And when the Soviet Union split up, there was these divisions, and there's been conflict. And the Russian part is supposed to be semi-autonomous, but it's not really, and there's an oppression of Russians there. And she has family in Moscow, so she just decided on her own to come, and she gave a little talk about what's going on in Moldavia, and this is her, she came to this TV thing with us.
One more point about her. She was one of the few people who was able to translate from Russian into English. There are a few people with us, thank God, because believe me, not that many people in Moscow speak English.
And not just that, because the alphabet's different, it's very hard to tell anything, to get on the subway trains, which are beautiful subway trains. Well, let's talk about that. I'm going to stop in a minute and let Mo continue. This is Margaret speaking at a press conference. They were very, very interested in what's going on in Ferguson. There were a lot of interviews in the papers and the media. This is us at the Palestinian embassy, which is interesting. The United States doesn't recognize such a country as Palestine, and Russia does. So they have an embassy, and the guy in the middle is the Palestinian ambassador. Those are 4 of the 5 people that were on our trip. He met with us, and we just talked about what's going on in Palestine, what's going on with Media Olda, so forth. He would ask us questions. Do you think we do a good enough job of letting people know what's really happening and kind of oppression and all this kind of stuff? And it was a very cordial, nice meeting. It's different than most embassies because when you walk in, you see pictures like this. In most countries' embassies, you don't see a picture of a demonstration. And of course, Arafat is in there too. But now, there's basically 2 forces in Palestine. There's the Palestinian Authority and there's the Hamas groupings, and this is really an embassy of the Palestinian Authority. And then towards the end, we held a demonstration at the American Embassy. It was a 2-hour demonstration. In the freezing rain, people stayed. Mo and I got there late because we made a mistake. We took a cab. And there's more traffic in Moscow than I've seen anywhere ever.
Including New York City.
They have some of these major circular roads that go around the whole place. There's 7 lanes in each direction, so it's a 14-lane highway. Anytime, day or night, you're in traffic. And if we had taken a subway, we would have got there right away. But you see, there's some of the writing, Russian writing. It's hard to even tell. You can sound things out if you're in Mexico, but in Russia it's very difficult. So we decided it would be easier to take a cab. We did. We got there late, but we got there for the demonstration. Media was all there, and they decided to make the demonstration centered around what was going on in the United States with the black protests in Ferguson. So they made a whole series of signs like this with both the UNAC symbol, which is the 3-piece signs, and the symbol of their organization. And we were chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot," in the middle of downtown Moscow. And we went and laid some roses at the door of the embassy for, Michael Brown and Eric Gardner. And now this is Putin at his press conference. We were in Russia when he did his press conference. I'm going to end with this, and Mo's going to take it over. It was an interesting press conference, and I told you what I think of Putin, I told you what I think about Russia, and so forth. But if I'm honest, it was very impressive. He sat down at a desk, no teleprompter in front of him, for 3 hours. The whole thing was on TV, and he spoke for maybe 15 minutes at the beginning. And what he said in those 15 minutes is very interesting. He said, "We are being hurt by," he says, "the economy has grown in the last year." He gave the figures about how much wheat and all this kind of stuff they grew. He says, "The economy has grown, but we are being hurt by the sanctions from the West and by the falling oil prices. And we could see that. If we went and exchanged money when we got there for rubles, dollars for rubles, we got a certain price. If we waited 2 days, we would have got a better price. So
No, actually, it was a matter of hours. At
yeah,
the
you
time
could
we
see
were
it
there-
going up and down, but mostly down. And
What is a dollar for
what?
What is a dollar for
It varied. Yeah, it was between, the low was around 52 and the high, I think, was around 80. So it really varied. I mean, the dollar became better, like more valuable and less valuable. Over the period of time we were there about a week.
We went to a
I
mall.
was there in October, it was $1.32.
For 32.
Now, we were at a mall, and we saw people carrying out big consumer goods, like flat screen TVs and stuff. And so we asked the people we were with, what he's doing? He said, it's around Christmas, these are Christmas presents. He says, because people expect the ruble to go down, and they're trying to get the best price they can right now for these things that have to come in from outside. And so that's what they were doing. He took questions from everybody. He took questions from right-wingers from Kiev that basically tried to diss the whole Russian population. That people were ignorant and stupid and not as smart as the rest of the world and stuff like that. We listened to him and then he answered. The BBC was the worst question I heard. BBC basically just said what I said before. The whole world is afraid of you. You're invading Ukraine. You're doing all this kind of stuff. You're an aggressive power. Why do you have to be so aggressive? There's peaceful people all throughout the world, all that kind of stuff. He just listened to the whole thing and said, we have 2 foreign bases outside of Russian territory. They're both in former Soviet republics. The United States has over 800. He said, we are surrounded by NATO and that first picture was the one by NATO and the United States. You're doing sanctions against us. We have not been in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria and all this kind of stuff. And we don't have any forces in eastern Ukraine. He says there are Russians there. I'll tell you there are Russians there. But they're not mercenaries. They're not getting paid like the American mercenaries and the other right-wing mercenaries who have come in to help the Kiev government. These people are volunteers. That this is a porous border. There are families on both sides of the border. They have a natural feeling for people on both sides of the border, and there are some people fighting there. But we have not sent troops. We have not sent tanks. We have not sent armaments, and that's simply not true. But it's not true on the other. But it is true for the other side. So they gave a very interesting answer for that. And Mo was going to talk about, I think, at one point where we met this guy who was there. He was a fighter from, actually he's fighting in part of the defense forces in the East. He came from Kiev, actually. He first supported the Maidan rallies, but when I went to them, it was so clear they were carrying swastikas, all sorts of right-wing things, and they were anti-Russian, although Russian is the major language there. They didn't want people to speak Russian on the Maidan. And I'm Russian. He said, I left almost immediately. He went to the east and joined the defense forces, and he's been fighting there ever since. We'll talk a little bit. But for 3 hours, he took questions that were some hostile, some from Russians that were hostile. Like, how come there's not enough beds in the hospital here? That kind of question, or something like that. And there is some discussion that although they've socialized medicine, they're trying to make a privatized piece alongside of it, like they're trying to do in England and so forth. That's what happens, I guess, in the capitalist economy. So he took all those questions and answered them. And I just thought of an American conference, press conference with Obama. There were those kind of questions, those people would never be back. The news agency would be banned from the White House. So I'm going to leave it there. Mo's going to show you a lot more slides and some pictures of what things look like. so forth.
So this was a T-shirt I got. It was being sold right on the streets of Moscow. Isn't that wonderful? Little Obama saying, "I love Moscow." He ought to. Okay? It's a really beautiful city. I think it was actually more nicely decorated for Christmas than you would even see in New York City. Everywhere you went, there were lights. In the parks, buildings were lit up. We'll show you Red Square and the Kremlin. It was extremely Christmassy. The one thing that you didn't see any hint of religious sentiment. But yet there was, they had, you'd see St. Nicholas and people like that, but there weren't any nativity scenes or anything like that. It was very interesting to me. So culturally, and really, they were very into Christmas culturally, but this is also a country that has churches everywhere. And in fact, some of the big draws, big tourist draws, are the churches. And I think we might have a picture or two, because we did visit at least one or two very famous churches. I posted this on Facebook.
I'm sorry, just
Yeah.
on the Christmas thing. It hit me while there and then coming back to the United States that we no longer really have big Christmas displays that are put up by the cities. They're private. They're in the stores or in people's homes. And there's not so much, but when you start seeing some of the things, the pictures here that Mo has, you can see these incredible decorations.
Yeah, so anyway, so this picture, you can see in the background, you can see that typical Russian architecture. That's called the Little Kremlin. And actually, I'm not sure what this building originally was, but it's now a flea market. And so when we went, actually, the flea market, there were some stalls selling things, but it's a much, much bigger flea market than what we saw. And you can buy, in a typical American flea market, maybe like the type you see in New York City where, the garment sellers come down and put all their wares out on the streets. So that's the kind of market that it is. Really very, very beautiful architecture there. This is one of the decorated Christmas trees that you would see. And this was all over the city, especially in the downtown area. You saw many, many, many lighted trees. Same thing here, not a great picture. We were taking a lot of pictures as we were driving. But this is a typical lit up scene. The trees were very beautifully lit up and decorated for Christmas. I chose this picture, just shows you the kind of architecture. If you look at just the layout of the street, it reminds me of, when we've been in Europe before, an old European city. It looked very much like that. The architecture is very, very European. So it does look very much like a European city. Sort of the contrast between the old and the new. So there's an old building in the back there. I'm not exactly sure what building that was. I'm not sure if you know, Joe. But their mode of transportation is every bit as modern as ours, and in fact, in some ways, it's more modern than ours. So, for example, on the Moscow subway, if anybody wants to look at the Moscow subway map, here it is. The Moscow subway system has Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi. Does our subway system?
Comment on the Kremlin.
Well, we're going to show you some pictures of the Kremlin.
We'll do questions
Yeah,
in a few minutes.
yeah. We did visit the Kremlin actually a couple of times. Now, the two people in this picture, that's Joe Eisbacher that Joe was mentioning, who was one of the 23 activists who had their homes raided by the FBI, and so he was on our contingent. The woman that you see there is our tour guide, so she gave us a tour of Moscow. Now, I don't know if you want to make any comments about her politics. Okay, so she gave us a tour of Moscow and gave us some political background that we didn't really agree with, but it was an excellent tour regardless. Here we are. We are there on Red Square, and these are some of the people in our contingent, in our group. This man up there on the left. You want to mention anything about him? Okay, you don't want to mention anything about him. Okay. The woman next to me is very interesting. You might want to mention something about this. Her name was Kate. Okay. The woman right to the left of me. She was English speaking, and in fact, she was from the U.S. originally. And she was, although she was in the process of getting a divorce, she was the wife of a U.S. diplomat. And what happened to her was, as she described it, she was in the diplomatic circles, the Washington bubble. And, among all these monkey mucks that are in the government and that, have their own view of the world and of reality. When Ukraine, back last February, almost a year now, had the coup, and she was listening to her husband's colleagues talk about what was going on, but she was curious enough and skeptical enough to start reading on her own and looking into the alternative media and reading online. And she realized that what her husband and his colleagues were talking about was a complete falsehood. And it basically, she had like an existential crisis, or a political crisis, or a consciousness crisis, whatever you want to call it. And it was one of the reasons, probably not the only reason, it was one of the reasons for the demise of their marriage. It was as though she could no longer live the lie. So she was in a real period of transition when she joined us, and I think it was very elucidating for her to be among activists for whom the ideas that she was beginning to realize, these things are just common sense to us. And she said to us several times, I didn't know there were people like you out there. You know, think about that. So it was very interesting it was almost like she was coming from the other side, and now she was coming on to our side. We saw Lenin's tomb. How many people here know that Lenin's body literally is mummified in Lenin's tomb, and it's on display for the world? I didn't know that. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It looks like Lenin. All the pictures you see of him, it looks just like him. Only he's dead. I mean, you know, it's a dead body. But it's a preserved dead body. I mean, it's bizarre, but it's wild. I heard that, you know, when we went, you could see the line. The line was pretty short. We got in there within, I don't think we waited more than 5 minutes, but there can be, you know, very, very long lines. So luckily we went, you know, in the dead of January. It was very cold out. So Lenin's tomb obviously is right there on Red Square, and Red Square and the Kremlin are literally, they're right together.
That's the Kremlin wall.
Yeah, that's the Kremlin wall. So on the Kremlin wall, what you see there, these are actually tomb markings. Okay, so these are people who are buried in that wall. So revolutionaries, politicians, and so forth. And you can't really see it, but that's the third one
One on the right.
is Bill Hayward. Bill Hayward
From the IWW.
is buried in the wall of the Kremlin. Isn't that amazing? Interesting what they do with their dead, you know? I mean, it's great. So here's more names of people who are buried in the wall. You know, you look at these tombstones, you have to look at this kind of closely, but you can see when these people died. They all died around 1917, 1918, the Russian Revolution. Almost all of them. 1917, 1918. And you can see that long wall. You can see on the bottom, those are flowers. I don't know if those were real or artificial flowers, to tell you the truth, but there's flowers beneath all of those tombs. And guess who that is? Stalin. Stalin. So there are a number of busts. They were along that wall of Russian political figures, and one of them was Stalin. This is another scene from Red Square. You can see the decorative kind of architecture there. Just again, this was all at Red Square. Some people in our group. So here's a couple of cops. And let me say something about the cops, because we're lousy with cops in this country, right? They're everywhere. When we had our demonstration over at the American Embassy, there were cops there. There were 2 cops. And they sat in their car and they didn't pay any attention to us, really. They were just sitting there, right? I actually felt less paranoid in Moscow than I do here. Truly. Okay? There were fewer cops. There were cops, but they were not, they weren't like militarized cops. You can see they're wearing normal cop stuff, I think they were mainly trying to keep warm. They weren't trying to intimidate us, Honestly, I felt safer there, right? This was actually very moving. As much as we all hate war, this was a soldier standing by the tomb of the unknown soldier. They stand there at absolute erect attention. There's 2 of them. There's just one here. And we also, we were there at a time when they did the changing of the guard. And it's a very solemn, sort of ceremony where the two soldiers that have been standing there come up, and then the 2 new soldiers come in. They kind of march in unison and then swap places. It's quite moving. This is at Red Square. So there are these, Santa Claus types of people there. And, they kind of, I think they kind of want to sell you a picture. You take a picture with them, and they like to sell you pictures. I didn't bite, but I did allow myself to have a friend take a picture of me with whoever that is. I'm not sure what they call that. And the bird, too. Yeah, the bird was great. And so this figure here is a very typical Russian, I'm not sure, what do they call her? But it's like, Mother Christmas as opposed to Father Christmas. Again, Red Square. So in the background, you can see that building in the background is a very, very beautiful historical museum. This is a mall. Now, this is amazing. There was a mall right on Red Square, right by the Kremlin, and it was as Americanized as you could possibly imagine. In fact, Most of the stores in this mall were too expensive for me to shop in, all right? There were the Versace's and, you know, the Gucci's and all those really, really expensive stores. And I've never seen a mall decorated more elaborately and more beautifully than this mall. I think it was called Oom. Was it called Oom? Oom. Yes, you know that. Yeah, the Oom. Yeah. Here's another interesting thing of Russian culture. In the middle of the mall, in the center, you know how we have kiosks at malls, you know, that sell things. Well, this was in the center of the mall. And these are actually costumes from Russian motion pictures. Okay, so these represent like a figure, an actress, wearing a costume that was a real replica from a Russian picture, a Russian motion picture. The food was great. They have a lot of food there. Nobody's starving. At least it doesn't look like anybody's starving. So they had wonderful, wonderful food. Now this is the subway system was absolutely amazing. I don't know if I can compare it to the New York, you know, the New York City subway system. But this subway, the subway stations, in fact, I will tell you that people were telling us that a lot of people will come to Moscow and one of the things they do for sightseeing is just ride the subways all day. Because when you get out at these different stations, all of them are beautiful. So for example, they have...
Gorgeous.
What?
They're just gorgeous.
They are.
They have statues.
Statues and sculptures and, you know, they have like political kind of figures and scenery and stuff.
All
So
names like Revolutionary
Don't say it.
Station and,
Yeah.
and
Don't say it.
Yes.
Partisan Station.
yes, a lot of artwork, just the incredible beauty in this city. You know, really beautiful things. So this is a typical subway station. This kind of statuary that they have. Now this is one that I absolutely love. People have told me, a couple people told me that there's things like this in the U.S. as well. You can't see it real well, but this is a soldier, statue of a soldier, and it's a dog. And
With a dog.
with a dog. The soldier has its nice dog, and we would stand there and watch. And one of our colleagues who was Russian speaking told us this, that there is a tradition that when you see this dog, you always touch his nose. So it's for good luck. And sure enough, you know, you watch the crowd get out of the train, they go by that dog, everybody touches the dog's nose. So don't Joe touch the
So
dog's
while I
nose.
was touching the dog's nose, and I got a lot of good luck, Bo was taking my picture, and all the Russians were very polite, because in the subway, you know, they're rushing from one place to the other to get to places. If you see New York subway, it's the same thing. They all stood and let her take the picture, and there was a big queue by the time the picture was taken, so when I moved away, one after the other in the queue went to touch the dog's nose.
So the dog's nose, you can see it's like all the paint is worn off. I mean, it's very clear that millions of hands have touched this dog's nose. So it's a real superstition. In fact, Tate, that woman that I told you that left her, was leaving her husband over all of this, you know, she said, you know, that there's a certain superstitious thread that runs through Russian culture. I don't know if other people have ever heard about that, but there seems to be some of that. Not that we don't have it in this country either. This was a Russian menu. One of the most frustrating things, okay, and anywhere I go in foreign countries, I can't get a decent cup of coffee, all right? So I'm trying to get a decent cup of coffee. I have American coffee. Not as good as Dunkin' Donuts coffee, but it's American coffee. But the problem was the waiters and waitresses don't speak English, okay? So I was reduced to doing things like I took a picture of the right kind of coffee that I wanted, and then I just started showing them a picture of the coffee. This is the kind of coffee. Okay? It was actually American coffee, but again, some of them don't understand English, and so I didn't necessarily get the right kind of coffee. So that's what I was reduced to doing. Now this guy was the fighter from the Ukraine, and I was very honored to meet this guy because I've been following, and I'm sure many people here, I know Joe had, I've been following the Ukraine crisis ever since, you know, it's kind of erupted about a year ago. And really learning what is actually going on in the east of Ukraine and how they are bombing people like me and you. They are bombing elderly people who have nowhere else to go, so they're staying in their homes. And so this man is fighting on behalf of the people in the east of Ukraine. They are not terrorists. They're people. Imagine Washington bombing Del Mar. Okay? Where would you go? And what would you do? And would our children, our adult children, not want to defend us and to defend their land? And that's exactly what they are doing.
When you say they, who's doing the bombing?
Kiev.
Kiev.
Yeah, just
All
Kiev.
with-
Oh, yeah.
U.S. has given a tremendous amount of money, and NATO also.
Yeah, we've been actually providing aid, first
It's not been
covertly.
The Ukraine, but it's a real story. We should be talking about.
Yeah, we could do a whole a whole night on Ukraine, because what people, and when you, I don't even read it, I can't read it, I can't look at anything in this country, you know how it is, it just infuriates you because it's so false. But everything that I had heard and read about and explored and researched about Ukraine, this man confirmed, and the other people who lived in Russia and who understand what's going on in Ukraine confirmed everything that we knew to be true. And how many people know what this is? What is this? Okay, St. George Ribbon. St. George Ribbon. So if you go into the archives of back in, well, really still to this day, the fighters in East Ukraine, the people in East Ukraine wear St. George's ribbons. Now, these ribbons, I think, originate in World War II. And so these are the ribbons that were affiliated with the people, the fighters in Russia who were trying to defeat the Nazis. Okay? So these St. George ribbons have become a real lightning rod in Ukraine, because the western part of Ukraine, as you know, is on the side of Kiev, at least officially they're on the side of Kiev. They're fighting against the so-called Russian separatists or Russian terrorists in the east, which again are people like me and you simply wanting to live in peace and defend their land. The people in Novorossiya, which is now, it's a new, they're attempting to make a new independent state, Novorossiya, and their symbol, what they wear, and the fighters as well, the people in the people's, what do they call it, the DNR? The DNR, they call it the people's militias, yeah. This is what they're wearing. Now, if you read about what happened in Odessa on May 2nd, that's an example of the people who were demonstrating in favor of Donetsk and Lugansk, the people's army, the people, okay? They were wearing these ribbons. So these ribbons became very symbolic of the resistance, okay, of the people, the people's army, the people's militia. And it's a symbol of anti-fascism. And anti-fascism, anti-Nazi, right?
In all of the Russia and Eastern Ukraine, May 8th is considered Victory Day. We don't support it. That's the day of the defeat of the Nazis. And for the first time this last May, in the western part of the Ukraine, it was not celebrated because there's a lot of Nazis in the government, people. And in the eastern part, they did continue to celebrate it. They see their struggle there as an anti-fascist struggle. That's what they all have said over and over again. All the people we met there, they just said the anti-fascist struggle, that's their struggle.
And they're basically fighting the offspring, 2 generations later, of Nazis, okay? Of the Nazis that were fighting on, people in Ukraine that were fighting on the side of the Nazis were the people in the West. It's almost like a replay to some degree of that same thing.
The right sector and the Svoboda Party, which are the right-wing parties, trace their origins back to pro-Nazi groups that existed in the Ukraine when the Nazis came into the Ukraine, and they helped the Nazis do massacres in the cities. And one of their leaders is a guy named Bandera.
Stephen Bandera.
And they all celebrate his birthday and all this kind of stuff. It's a real... They have large. Why don't we just finish and take questions? Because I think there'll be a lot of
yeah. Let me.
Stuff coming.
Yeah. So we'll take plenty all the questions. So anyway, story behind these. So as I was following what was going on in Ukraine and realizing just the horrors of what was going on, the Nazis, the fascists in Ukraine, the people that are fighting against the eastern part of Ukraine, they were calling the people in the east of Ukraine, who are primarily Russian, they were calling them derogatory names. For example, Moscow. Moscow is a smear, okay, meaning Moscow. So they're Muscovites, right? So to be Russian, it's almost like using the N-word, okay, in the Ukraine. To be Russian, saying you're Moscow is like, using the N-word, okay? And they were calling, the Nazis in Ukraine, Western Ukraine, were calling the people who were demonstrating for the rights of the eastern part of Ukraine. They were calling them, Colorado beetles. Colorado beetles. This is the color of a Colorado beetle, okay? So this became, this particular ribbon became a symbol, of the People's Republic, the right of the people to live in peace, the right of the people not to be ruled by Nazis. When I was in Russia, when I first came to Russia and met up with that tall guy we talked about who ran the conference, Alexander, a wonderful young man I said to him, I want some St. George's ribbons because I'd like to wear them and give them to people to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Do you know where I could get any St. George ribbons? He came back that afternoon and he had this huge pile of St. George's ribbons. And so I'm asking if anybody would like a St. George's ribbon. I haven't been able to find these anywhere else, so I got these straight from Moscow. And anybody who's familiar with the Ukrainian struggle right now will recognize this ribbon. And so this is a sign of solidarity with the people in the east of Ukraine. So please, at the end of this, feel free to take one if you would like. We were wined and dined very, very generously there. And one of the evenings, they actually put on a musical show for us. And they invited a group who sings folk songs from all different parts of the world. And so they're a Russian group. They were very good. And one of the songs they sang in English was "Oh Susanna." So they learned, they learned these folk songs, and even their inflections, on "Oh Susanna," just the way you sing that and the kind of the style that has, and kind of like, the meaning of "Oh Susanna." They really got it down. So it was really quite lovely, quite
I
beautiful.
left that night early, but I stayed, and they got everybody up dancing. That's very interesting. They just came down and just dragged people up to the dance floor and got people dancing and doing things to music. Mostly folk dances, all kinds of folk dances. Very interesting.
So this is actually just, we have many more pictures, and we could go on for many hours, but this is sort of, I think, a good overview. We do want you to be able to ask any questions you want now, so feel free.
Did you see that rock group of those girls?
Oh,
No. But
Pussy Riot.
we had discussion. It's called Pussy Riot. It's the group you're thinking of, I think.
we saw the church, though, where they sang that song.
Yeah, they
We were
brought
in
us
that
to the
church.
church where
Yeah.
they did this. And, my inclination is to support Pussy Riot. They were all against Pussy Riot. They said this is a group that's, this wasn't the first thing they did, this was the first time they were arrested. They said right before they did this, they actually went into a museum, and we were in a museum. We were in a museum. You could see pictures.
It's hard to hear you, Joe.
Yeah, they said they went to. We were in a museum, and you could see. Look, there's like teachers and groups of kids coming through the museum. They said in the museum they took off all their clothes in front of these kids, and they felt they were pushing things in such a way, kind of to gain a kind of reaction that could be used by the West against them. This was the general line of people that we spoke to. Now, as I said in the beginning, I think some of these people don't have a consciousness about feminism and don't have a consciousness about gay rights. That those movements haven't hit in Russia to the extent they did. They have here, or probably the rest of the world actually, but Russia probably more. And so we went to this church. It's this very beautiful church where a lot of old people were going, and they stop at the various stations and they kiss the slave 7 times or do different rituals, which what they do. Some of the people we were with, did those things, and some of the people like us stood apart from those because they're basically atheists and so forth. It put it in a little bit different perspective. I still don't think they should have been arrested for what they did. But it put it in a little bit of perspective of kind of, I could see the people there being, feeling, kind of what is happening here? It's a desecration. It's a, I could see that kind of feeling from the people that we saw there. So that put it in a little bit of a different light for us, but we did go to that church.
What do you see as the prospects of the Ukrainian conflict being resolved peacefully? Are there any groups actively promoting?
Well, one of the other things that happened was when I was there, someone handed me contact information for a woman from Kiev who said is the main leader of the anti-war organization in Kiev. I've now had 2 conversations with her on the phone. We have to through Skype, you have to have a third person to translate because she's all over the internet, you can see, and she has a website which is called stopwar.com.ue. And it's in Russian, so you have to use a Google translator and so forth to figure out exactly what they're saying. She explained the peace movement in the West. She says the majority of people in the West are against the war. She herself is a member of parliament. I asked what party she ran. She said she used to be part of the party of regions. In the last election, the two parties were outlawed. One was the party of regions, and the other was the Communist Party. The Communist Party is probably the biggest party in Ukraine, and they were both outlawed in the last free election. She said, but they did put up candidates. In the end, they were not allowed to run. She quit the party of regions when she formed the Anti-War Coalition because they did not want her to do that. They're against the government and were against the coup, but they thought that that was not the right thing to do in the western part of Ukraine. She says there's three kinds of peace movements that are in the western part of Ukraine. There's her organization, which is the largest. They do street demonstrations. A number of them have been broken up by the right-wing forces. They do try to organize aid to go to the eastern part of the Ukraine where a lot of aid that's needed. And they support the anti-draft movement. There's a large anti-draft movement which is mainly organized by mothers, wives, people who have been drafted. The draft is illegal by their constitution unless it's a declared war. This is not a declared war, so it's illegal, and they try to use this illegal avenue. So there's one other group. There's her group. There's these mothers that are fighting against the draft, but are not coming out explicitly against the war, although she says they're all against the war. But they feel if they say that, that will give them a less chance on the draft to get their loved ones home. And then she said there's a group of people, officers in the military that are against the war and have been fighting for trading prisoners of war and have been really opposing the war. And if you go to anti-Maidan on YouTube, you'll see some YouTube pictures of actually soldiers in Kiev, brigades of soldiers protesting against the war. So the anti-war sentiment is coming to the soldiers, which is a good thing. But they're getting lots of people from overseas, especially right-wing forces from other European countries, from Canada. They have some private militias that from the oligarchs that have been hiring people from Blackwater and groups like that to do their fighting. And then they have these specific brigades, which are really the right sector and Sloboda Party, that are really brutal and fight those particular brigades. So already, there's no peaceful solution because there's fighting, massive fighting that's going on, much more than we're being told in the eastern part of Ukraine. And so hopefully, this peace group is pushing for the peace negotiations that are taking place. Hopefully that will happen. And they do things called telebridges, where they try to get people from the western Ukraine to talk to people in Lugansk and Donetsk. They have groups of people come together on both sides of these telebridges and try to talk to each other. So they're looking for kinds of peaceful solutions and so forth. Lots of money and lots of military aid is going to Kiev. They're doing lots of bombing and lots of shelling. And they've caused lots of death and destruction already. So it doesn't look too good. I cannot conceive, and this is what the Ukrainians who were there, them conceive of ever getting back together with the people from Kiev. They said they've done so much hurt to us already and are killing us indiscriminately that we could not see coming back together.
Do you see it splitting it up into two countries?
That's the primary thing they want. There are some people that want to be part of Russia. There's some people that want their own country. There are some people who think that there is a way to get back to one Ukraine and maybe have some kind of autonomy, which is what the party of regions actually have been fighting for. That's why they were banned from the elections.
Is that considered a civil war?
I would consider.
Yeah, I mean, was there any, what you're saying about the Ukraine, I think you probably know, it's a bit controversial on the left.
Yes.
And I really question whether or not Russian agents are not involved in the eastern Ukraine. It's hard for me to imagine that they wouldn't be.
But you have evidence?
I'm just saying, come on, this is the real world. There is such a thing as great Russian nationalism, which has been very damaging. It was a problem in the former Soviet Union, and it's still a problem today. In the smaller, Russia used to be known as the prison house of nations, and I don't think, although the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union made some strides in overcoming that, I don't think it was ever completely eradicated. So were the people in this conference that you went to aware of that problem, or is that part of their consciousness, that there is this legacy of great Russian nationalism?
Not
that
totally.
was here countries around the
Not
former
totally.
Soviet Union?
Somewhat, and not totally. One of the things that made us think we can trust these people was the fact that they supported, they were not anti-Semitic. There's an anti-Semitism that goes through the whole part of the region, there always has been. And they were not anti-black. They very much was watching what was going on in Ferguson and supported it and considered themselves anti-racist. And some nationalists, don't look at things that way. For instance, the nationalists and fascists in Ukraine are very much anti-Semitic, very much anti-black, very much anti-Russian. It's a nationalist movement that they have. Ukraine over all of us, Germany over all of us. So that was one thing, but they're not totally aware of it. Now, Crimea was a place that was oppressed by the Tsar, and really was oppressed under Stalin. There were the Crimean Tatars, and that became an oppressed nationality. And a lot of them were actually forcefully moved out of, under the Tsar, out of the Crimea, other parts of the country to try to break the nationalism that they had. A lot of them moved back later on. And in 1954, Crimea, which had always been part of Russia, became part of the Ukraine because Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. It was all one country then. And the person who was the head of the Soviet Union in 1954 was Khrushchev, who happened to be Ukrainian. And he gave this as a gift to his country. He gave Crimea back. Because Crimea is a place, it's the only warm water port in Russia. There's not a lot of access out to the warm water areas. And it's also a vacation spot that people would go to, beaches and things like this. And so we kind of gave it to them. But there were mainly Russians that were there, Russian-speaking people. So when all this kind of stuff happened, they protested. And there were referendums that took place, just like in Luhansk and Luhansk, there were referendums that took place. And they chose, they wanted to go back to Russia. They did not want to stay with these other folks. And there were Russian troops in Crimea, because that's where their base was. But by treaty, they had a right to have 25,000. They had 16,000 and never increased that. And there might have been some collaboration between the forces that are for independence in Crimea and the Russian forces that were there. But no new Russian forces did come in. And it's true, it's a prison house of nations. And you can see that now. There was a little bit sense that Putin gave back a good feeling of being Russian to the Russian people. And that was one of the reasons he's a populist kind of person. It's one of the reasons he has the support. And the Communist Party, which is huge, and was the second party after Putin's party in the elections, and holds a lot of seats in their parliament, has a very nationalistic wing. And so it's gone through a lot of splits. The Communist Party split to a major split called the Communist Workers' Party. When we were at this demonstration at the American Embassy, we saw a bunch of people who were talking to them. And a lot of them considered themselves communists, but they split from the Communist Party. And they have a lot of these little communist groupings now, exist all over the place. And you can see there's a nationalist sentiment. Yes, it is true. There's Russian nationalist sentiment, and that was part of it. Russians Russian language was attacked. One of the first things the coup government did in Kiev was ban the Russian language, which is the majority language in all of Ukraine. There's only 10% of Ukraine that speaks only Ukrainian. There's about 40% that speaks only Russian, and the rest speak a combination of both. The early stuff that was put out by the right sector of Ukrainian was grammatically totally wrong, because they didn't even speak the language Ukrainian, but they wanted to push for the Ukrainian language. I forget where I'm going with all this, but yes, there is a Russian nationalism, and yes, Russian nationalism is a dangerous thing, in my opinion. But I don't see Russia doing around the world the kind of aggressive imperialism that the United States is. Yes.
I just had a question about the other areas of Russia. I know you didn't get to visit the rural outside of Moscow, right? You were basically in the city. So I imagine, like, you mentioned that everybody seemed like they were well fed, there's plenty of food, they're well dressed. But I just wonder, like, is that just there in the capital, or did you
Well, I
get
talked to a lot of
meet
people.
representatives from the rural?
Right, I talked to a lot of people when I got back about that. I was wondering. And they said that from what they see and what they understand is Moscow and St. Petersburg are very kind of yellowified cities. And there's a big middle class in the cities and so forth. And there's more poverty out in the region.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, just that there's less support for Putin out in the region.
Yeah.
And they said, no, it's exactly the opposite. The yellowified populations that are looking more towards the West, and all the opposition against Putin happens to be, what big opposition against Putin happens to be in those two cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow. And it's the quarter of people on the outskirts where there's more support for him. This is what I've been told. I have no independent way of knowing. And again, we've only been there for a week. Yes.
I don't think that.
Please.
I went, I was in St. Petersburg for 5 days in Moscow, and
When were you there?
I was there in October.
Okay.
And in between, I was 10 days taking the boat from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and I agree with all you said, except when you articulated better than all the things went through my mind. And I was impressed the countries were not as culturally fancy as the two big cities, but the life was just, I was impressed. Even a little village with a 13th century, the church is still maintained, and there are 500 people on this Casey Island, very cold in the north. And they have central heating everywhere. In Moscow,
Oh, yes.
you saw those stations?
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. And I want to just make a point. We were hot the entire time we were in Moscow, okay? We were hot. You know how we keep our heat down, at least I do, because it's expensive.
Yeah.
It was hot everywhere because of the central heating system that they have. It's like, I'm not even sure how it
You know what
works.
central heating means in Russia? Central heating here means you have a furnace in your house, and you have stuff that goes through the house. Heating is a utility there, so they have power plants, and they have pipes that come to the houses.
Solar.
And so you don't have to buy your own furnace. It's like your electricity or whatever is provided for you, and that's what
Goes
central
to all of the
heating is.
buildings.
And because they have a lot of energy, that's probably why there's so much heat.
Plus, this remote area, it's a little village, it's an island with 500 people, and little houses scattered, and the pipe goes to everywhere. And the free education and the free,
There's a lot of greenhouses in Russia that are heated, I think, with what's left over or something. And so
So that helps with the food
you'll
production?
see these vast
But
greenhouses.
you see, us going there is one of the things about it is not just to say this stuff, is to see that there were people really like us. We became really friendly with some of the people. There's guy Slavas, who spoke English. he's just this incredibly nice guy, you know, and to think, you know, now as we're pushing towards aggression towards Russia, which does have weapons of mass destruction, why do we want to kill these people? And for them to see us, there are people that don't, in the United States, that don't support the U.S. government, for us to see them. And we were so much the same. I mean, we felt, because we were doing this together, we felt so close to each other. I mean, it's hard to believe in this 1 week that we came so close. We had a lot of communication back and forth ever since, believe me. Especially with Facebook now and all this kind of stuff, but on the phone and everywhere, and Skyping and stuff like this. To see that, and that's what people need to know. So these are people, they have the same aspirations and desires that we do. In a different culture, but it's a beautiful culture. Yes, Paul.
Maybe you're answering part of that question now, but my question now is, what do you feel that the organized conference hope to accomplish, and what do you see, having been there, you see coming out of that conference?
Well, you know, I'm very frightened about what's going on in terms of the possibility of military aggression. When I was in Wales in September for the NATO conference, two things they were talking about at the NATO conference was one, the Ukraine, and two was expanding NATO. You know, when the United States, when Russia, when the Soviet Union first split up, the United States said it would not move, and NATO said they would not move NATO into the former Soviet republics or to the Eastern Europe. Today they're in Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and Slovakia. And they wanted to expand some more. They wanted to expand into Sweden and Finland, two of the places they wanted to expand. Because what's happening, global warming has caused some of the ice to melt in the Arctic, and Russia is now able to drill in that area where there is a tremendous amount of energy reserves, and the U.S. wants to challenge them for those reserves. Is one of the things, and so they wanted to expand to those countries, but some of the other countries. While we were there was U.S. military and NATO and U.S. military maneuvers in Estonia, right on the Russian border, and it's a real threat that's going on, you know. And how far do these people going to push it? You know, like the Cuban Missile Crisis years ago that we almost came to World War III. They're going to push it that far. What are they going to do? You know, and so we hoped to be able to come back and explain that no, we don't want to have war. What the U.S. is saying in the Ukraine, which is using as the excuse for doing this, we passed a resolution on Congress, and almost every single person voted for it, which is basically a declaration of war against Russia. And you know, we're hoping that they and we, people to people, on both these places, on both sides, can try to draw down the conflict and try to do this. But I have to say, the onus for this conflict is not Russia, it's the United States. So the responsibility is more on us than on this country.
So they,
True. Let me just get it and I'll come back.
I was just wondering, what do you think the perception of this anti-globalization movement, what's their perception of us, of Americans?
They were amazed. There were also a lot, we really got a lot of press coverage. I mean, major press coverage, like we get in here. You know, BNP has this great TV show, you know, that we do on cable. And some of us see it. But we were on the major TV shows, and major media was actually there. They were so interested in Americans coming. And what do we think? You know, we don't represent much of America. Perhaps, although the anti-war sentiment is the greatest, is a majority sentiment in the United States. I certainly don't think the government represents the sentiment of the people of the United States at all. It represents the corporations and so forth. But after a while, we all spoke. I spoke as the first U.S. person to speak, and others in this movie. And as soon as I spoke, people grabbed me by the shoulder and stuff, wanted me to go out in the hall and do interviews and all this kind of stuff, and I did some of that stuff. And they all were amazed at what we were saying, that we didn't have the U.S. State Department line, we had a different line. And after a while, we were sitting in this little clump of all of us together with the interpreter over on to the left of the stage, and I noticed that every speaker was not looking directly out at the audience. They were looking over here at us, and they were speaking kind of to us. And they were kind of amazed that there are Americans like this. And I think they have a lot of hope that there are a lot of Americans like us. And I think there is fear, they're afraid of what we could do economically and sanctions and the oil prices and the ruble going down and what that will mean for people when we're across hard times, and they're afraid of war. In Russia and Eastern Europe, and Europe as a whole, they experienced World War II like we never did, and that's why this fight against fascism means something real, in a real sense. It's not just a political thought to so many of these people, and there's fear. Russia suffered 20 million losses in World War II, 20 million. And so they have hope that if people like us can stay there and work up. 1, 2.
Did you hear any talk about Russians wanting to push NATO out of Eastern Europe or just to abolish NATO altogether? Did you see any kind of that talk?
I didn't hear that. They all think NATO is bad. NATO should not be. I didn't hear that there's a movement to do that. What we did hear is that there's a reorientation from Russia, and we saw this in the press conference too, and a lot of the stuff that we read and heard. Reorientation of Russia from Europe, selling energy to Europe, to the East, especially China. They're building a pipeline with China. They're trying to reorient their trade with China and some other countries. There's been another new push on some of the BRICS things. They're making a bank where they can do their own credit ratings and not be tied to the Western credit ratings and all that kind of stuff. And so we hear that, but they're all opposed to NATO. NATO was built to contain the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union died, it should have died. NATO should have died, but instead, NATO grew, and NATO has continued to grow. Yeah, sorry.
Do you see any concern with global warming? Are they burning oil to provide their central heating? Are they looking
Well, one
for
of the people,
alternative energy?
I spoke to the woman that's the head of the Green Party there, who's part of this anti-global movement, and that's her big thing. She talks about global warming and the environment. They are afraid of that. Now, Russia has a lot of energy resources, and she realizes that. I didn't hear her say that Russia has to stop using its energy resources, but she was in favor of alternative resources. She clearly say that.
How about the people in general? That she was the only person you heard that...
She's the only person I talked to about that.
Oh.
So the energy for their central heating is oil-based fossil fuel.
It's possible.
It's
Yeah.
expressly.
Now, China has a big alternative energy push, but China's a real growing economy, and it's terrible air pollution and so forth. But there's a country that's done the most also for solar energy. There's a real lot that can be done there. Russia probably won't, because it's economy. Again, it's not a socialist country. It's a capitalist country. Yeah, Tom.
Were there any representatives of the Russian CP at this conference at all?
We were supposed to have a meeting with the head of the CP, but it fell through. But some people I told, who I talked to, said the official Communist Party of Russia is fairly conservative. Yes.
If you look at a map, so almost Crimea, look at a map. Russia, if you fly over it, you fly from New York to LA and back, and still, what do they do with all that land? You just
nonstop. There's a lot of land in Russia, but you know, when you look at a map is distorted because it's really a globe. If you take a globe and try to put it on a flat map, the extreme north and the extreme south will look a lot bigger than they really are, because you have to expand it so that this round thing becomes a square. And but there's a lot of land, but a lot of the land is frost. I've just been reading some of the stuff that Khrushchev did. At one point, Khrushchev tried to, because they have so much land, he tried to really do a period where they were going to expand their agriculture. And it turned out to be a great failure because a lot of the land really wasn't suited for that kind of growing. Growing seasons were short, things like that. It got dark around 3 o'clock. We were there in December, which is the shortest time of the year. But so there is a lot of land there, but it's not as much as it looks like on the map, and it's a lot of it is not great for growth. That's what I understand. Anything else? Yes.
I was just going to say that the people in Russia were surprised that people like you exist in the United States, and you were happy to realize there are people in Russia that are just like you. And this seems to be a solution for us finding peaceful ways to negotiate, but we don't have the power of the
Well,
government.
if it was you and I that were going to do the negotiating, we would find a way.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if it's
Yeah.
governments. It's
But
not-
there are people like us all over the world, and we just need to somehow find a way to come together, but I don't know how that ever going to happen. But anyway, it's really nice to hear that.
We're trying.
Yeah, oh, I know.
Well, the problem is not the people, the problem is the government.
It's the governments, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was reading, I don't know whether it was in the Nation or something, but it said that, they were talking about, it isn't George W. Bush, it isn't Obama, it isn't anything, but that, people are just totally disadvantaged.
When you think about it, the U.S. economy is in real bad shape. You know, when you look at the gross domestic product, the United States was supposed to be the amount of goods and services produced in the country. More than 40% of it is not goods and services. It's money that comes out of stock manipulations and different kinds of things they do like that. That never used to be the case, but it is fairly recently. But imagine this. Imagine if there was no war. First of all, there would be no need for this military-industrial complex. There would be no needs to produce these planes and tanks and guns and bullets. And these are interesting things because when you blow up a bomb, you got to make another one, you know. So it keeps going. But if all those people weren't working on those things, and if all the people that are in the military, and you know, we have our military expenditures are about that of all the other countries in the world put together. If all the people who were in the military went home and got jobs, if we have one more prison population, if they were out, if you didn't need all these security agencies like Homeland Security and stuff like this, we have a very big unemployment in this country. The economy really can't support the kind of peaceful, human economy that all of us would like to see. And that is a real problem. This is some of the force that keeps us on this kind of track, this kind of war, aggressiveness, militarization of the police, death penalty, all these kinds of things that we all hate keeps us on that track. And it's really endemic to the system that we live in. Yes.
Before we fall into despair and depression, it would be good for us to take note that we're part of the manifestation what we're focusing.
I always say we will win. Here's why. I believe when you go to Russia and you see these people and you like these people and stuff, that there's a quality of human beings that keeps us connected. We have empathy for each other. We love each other. We have these emotions that we have. And to do the kinds of things that they ask us to do, to go over killing people, it goes against that humanity within ourselves. That's why you have things like PTSD and these things, because they're asking us, forcing us to do inhuman things. And so they have to destroy that humanity in us. And they can never do that. That's human nature. They will never make the whole population psychopaths like them. And so there will always be a fight back against that. And that fight back is going to win. That's the point. Because it will never happen. That's the hope.
I'm sure, I imagine it might have been humbling to be in such an old culture too, like compared to here where we're like infants, culturally, like our country is so young in comparison. It must have been really pretty amazing to see, like you described, the architecture and the churches from the 1300s that are still
There's no
maintained.
United States in the 13th century.
What were some of your favorite experiences there? I mean,
Oh, I want to say one, the breakfast at the hotel. You would not believe the breakfast at this hotel, and it was not expensive. I don't know how much it was in dollars, but it was a few dollars.
$3.
$3. Okay. 7 different types of sauerkraut. Fish, meat, spaghetti, okay? Different kinds of bread, all different kinds of soups, along with eggs and omelets and vegetables. Okay, I was in heaven because, you have a lot of vegetables.
And live classical music.
They
being
had
played
a
by
pianist.
And a violinist.
And a violinist. And I walk into this breakfast room, it's like if you go to, like one of the Golden Corral, that's their breakfast. Okay, this is like a $3 breakfast at a hotel. But they had this pianist playing every morning, and one day they had a pianist and a violinist. And I walk in there, and you guys know the theme song from Dr. Zhivago, Lara's song? They're playing that song, and I'm like beginning to weep. It was so beautiful, okay? Try that if you go to a Motel 6, right? You're gonna get that. That was one of my favorite things about the trip.
Which hotel was it?
What was that called, Joe? Do you remember?
It was named after the street we were on, and I can't remember, but they had an Alpha, Beta, Gamma. They had like 4 or 5 different buildings that were named like that. We were in the Alpha building. I forget. We were on the 14th floor, and then when we did those 3 extra days, we did our own and moved down to the 8th floor. So it's a long, high, large building, with restaurants, cabarets, and all sorts of stuff going on at night. It's
Did
very.
you learn the Russian alphabet?
I wish I did, and I should have.
I don't think it would have done much good. It's very different from English, I'll tell you.
Yeah, no, but if we learned the Russian alphabet, we would have been able to at least, I learned some of the letters, like the P is an R.
If you know it, there's lots of
Yeah, you can probably do something.
cognates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like if you see Pettoka.
Yes, yeah.
P-E-K-T-O-P-A, that's, you read it restaurant.
Yeah. We did learn the word for restaurant, yeah.
Yeah.
And Moscow is spelled like Moskva, okay? You recognize that too, but a lot of it is like reading Greek.
So the lowest line here is Russia, isn't it?
Yeah, probably, yeah. The anti-globalization movement of Russia,
Joe and Mo, I just wanted to ask if you're accepting donations at this point to help reimburse the cost of your trip. Can you answer that question?
I think we got it, I appreciate that. And I would-
Divert that
I would
money
say
to-
give it to BNP.
Yeah, thank you though.
Well,
Thank you so much.
It was very cheap for us to do, because the plane flights are not that expensive in Moscow. And they helped us sort of some of the stuff.
Okay.
So if anybody, just a reminder, if anybody does want to St. George ribbon to express your solidarity with the people of East Ukraine, believe, I think they would, just knowing that we have these ribbons and that people are interested, I think would be, so feel free.
Did you fly on a Russian plane?
Aeroflot, it was awful. I mean, you know, it was no more awful than Delta, but I mean, you would think that you'd get a little bit of leg room on an international flight. It was pretty lousy.
Mo complains about the leg room.
Yeah. It was too small for me.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for
Yeah.
And my husband